So I don't need to say much about the negative outcomes of the growth-obsessed capitalist logics that we're all anxious about. Climate crisis, increasing inequality, erosion of democracy. And as an artist, I think about not just how we got to this place, but why we stay stuck here. And I look at these questions by examining the cultural, social, and political effects of software. And that's because whether we're talking about social media platforms or search engines or AI chatbots, we now live in a time where capitalism's need for endless growth and big tech's need for endless data have combined into a singular unified logic that now pervades all aspects of society. And you don't have to look very hard to find evidence of this. For example, if we graze the landscape of Silicon Valley leaders over the last few weeks, looking at what those responsible for today's software landscape think and talk about, we find Mark Zuckerberg continuing his quest to capture every bit of online sociality from every human on the planet, vowing with his new platform, Threads, to pour enough gasoline on this to grow to 1 billion users. The very highly influential Silicon Valley venture capitalist Mark Andreessen, just a few weeks ago, published his Techno-Optimist Manifesto, where he hails the techno-capital machine as the engine of perpetual growth and abundance, and names his enemies, including sustainability, social responsibility, tech ethics, and existential risk. Nothing to worry about there. Or OpenAI CEO Sam Altman. I think this is last week, where he affirms his devotion to scale as the way to give us, quote, superpowers on demand that enables more, and more. And with these three and many others like them, if you closely examine the interfaces of the apps that they build and fund, what do you find? You find visible metrics that condition us into feeling comfortable with endless accumulation, algorithmic feeds that keep us endlessly scrolling for more, and chatbots designed to keep us forever talking. In other words, I would argue that today's social media and AI platforms not only employ, but rely on an aesthetics of growth. And this makes sense as it's in service of their primary goal, which is endless profit. They use this aesthetics of growth to keep us clicking and scrolling and liking and chatting, normalizing the idea that our lives are best managed through quantification, and ultimately reconfiguring our conception of time so that we increasingly think of our lives and ourselves as infinite. They want us forgetting that our time and attention and the world we inhabit don't last forever, forgetting that we're only here for a tiny moment on a rock that can only give so much. And so what I want to talk about today are a series of art projects that I propose you think of as enacting a tactics of bounding, of containing and recapturing a feeling of the finite in the face of this digital infinite. In fact, lately I've been rethinking my overall project, reconsidering what I've been doing all this time as establishing and enacting an aesthetics of degrowth, an intentional practice of investigating, manipulating, recomposing the digital landscape that we inhabit in ways that counter, subvert, and reimagine the unified logics of capitalism and computing that now shape who we are and what we do. So I want to start with this screenshot of my Facebook newsfeed from about a decade ago. And here I've circled all of the numbers. These are the metrics that are littered throughout that count likes, shares, comments, notifications, friends, how many birthdays you could respond to today, etc. And as a user of Facebook back in 2011, when Facebook was the place everybody wanted to be, I found myself becoming increasingly self-aware of just how much attention I was paying to these numbers. And I really wondered, why is that happening? And the prime example being that when I'm shown how many likes my last post got, I wondered how that might be influencing what happens with the next thing that I write. How does it change what I do on the platform? And I've done some theoretical thinking and writing about these questions, which I believe students in the room may have read for today, theorizing about what I call the desire for more, or how our evolutionarily developed need for esteem is intentionally and endlessly activated by the designs of capitalistic big social platforms, leading us to always want higher numbers. But before I did any of that writing, I started by making something. And in my case, it was this work called Facebook Demetricator. It's a free and open source browser extension that hides all quantifications on the Facebook interface, allowing anyone to experience for themselves what the effects of these numbers might be. On the left, you can see a typical like, share, comment box, and on the right is what it looks like with Demetricator installed. You can see that people liked it, that it was shared, that there are comments, but no longer is the focus on how much people like our status or how many comments we got, but on who liked it and what they said about it. And so with this work, I'm recomposing the Facebook interface, in this case to hide the metrics, in order to investigate how metrics construct us as users. And I could say that feedback from users over more than a decade now, which I get a lot of, and which I wrote about in the paper that many of you read, reveals what many of us now collectively know, which is that visible metrics make users competitive. They make us compulsive. They can make us anxious. They influence what we post, what we like, and who we follow, often without us realizing that's what's going on. In the years since, I've added versions for other platforms, such as Twitter and Instagram. I've had multiple legal conflicts with Facebook, the corporation, over this work. In particular, both well before and after Instagram announced its epiphany interest that maybe there might be something wrong with some of these numbers. Something that they now do address in minor ways, but they only did so after Frances Haugen dumped a bunch of research out of the company showing that they'd known for years just how toxic those numbers are for teen self-esteem. So it's not something they want to do anything about. These kinds of manipulations don't always have to begin with code. For me, I often do go to code as a way to make this easily available to other people and for me to get a sense of it, but sometimes you can do it without as well.
I tried so hard and walk like an angel. Got a secret, can you keep it swift? I used to be so beautiful, now look at
If you wanna hit the road, then let's go then. Let's just go and see the world and just show them.
So I think it's kind of funny, right? But it's also, I'm trying to illustrate that you can experiment with interfaces in all kinds of ways. They don't have to be high tech. This is the lowest tech possible, I think, I could do. And it also deals with something that Pablo and I were talking about just a day or two ago, which is that, TikTok, these apps, they're deliberately closed to any kind of adjustment or manipulation like I do within the web browser. And that's exactly how they want it. I spent a week with this piece of tape on my phone, and it was occasionally annoying for other apps, but it was an epiphany for how different TikTok felt. And I'd encourage you to give it a shot, even for a day or an hour, and just see how often do you keep looking to that location on the screen, and how do you feel about the videos you're seeing when you don't see those numbers informing that feeling. In 2015, for years, users of Facebook had been clamoring for a don't like button. All we had at the time was a like button. But users were saying, I need a way to say that I don't like something. And so Mark Zuckerberg didn't come out with a don't like button. He came out with reactions. These are the additions to the like button that brought us wow, angry, haha, sad, love, angry, and these days also care. And the idea, as represented by Mark at the time, was to give you better options for expressing yourself, to make it easier for a user to indicate how they felt about any particular post. And while reactions may help your friends better understand how you feel, it also begins to build, over time, a more detailed profile about a user's emotional life on Facebook, providing multidimensional data about their emotions in context. In other words, reactions make possible a form of emotional surveillance, letting Facebook and others figure out, in the words of Cambridge Analytica's CEO, our hopes and fears. And so my response to this, which I launched in early 2017, right after the Trump election in the United States, is a work that I call Go Rando. Go Rando is a web browser extension that obfuscates how you feel on Facebook. Every time a user clicks like, Go Rando intercepts that click and instead randomly chooses one of the 7 reactions for you. So you click like and maybe you get love. Click like and maybe you get haha. You click like, maybe you get like. But the idea is that over time, a user will appear to Facebook's algorithms as someone whose feelings are perfectly balanced, as someone who feels angry exactly as much as haha, or sad precisely as much as love. And you can still choose a specific reaction if you want to. It doesn't break that functionality. But even when you do, that choice will be obscured by an emotion profile increasingly filled with noise. In other words, Facebook and everyone else who gets access to that data won't know if a reaction was genuine or not. So it's injecting noise into the system, it obfuscates how you feel, but of course it doesn't just obfuscate your feelings for Facebook, it also does so for or to your friends, right? So if your aunt twists her ankle and posts about it, you click like and get haha. Your friend gets their dream job and you click like and it says angry, right? These incongruencies of emotional reporting force a previously obscured aspect of the interface into the foreground, which is that we're all reporting how we feel all the time. And we feel obligated to do so accurately for some reason. So now I want to jump to 2018 in the United States. We had the Trump election in 2016. We had the Brexit election early 2017. We had been talking about in media studies and every other kind of studies about fake news and disinformation and proliferation of this kind of content on social platforms and algorithmic feeds. And as an artist headed for another election in the United States, I wondered, is there something I could do? I'd already hidden metrics, I'd already obfuscated emotion. There are other mods I'd done of Facebook that I haven't talked about today, but given that there was still a primary coming, disinformation was still rampant, other nations were using those platforms to manipulate the electorate in the United States, I wondered what I could do. And so that led me to release this piece that I put out shortly before the election in 2018 called SafeBook. And SafeBook is Facebook without any of the content at all. No images, no text, no video, no audio, just the empty containers left behind after the content is removed. It's a painstaking removal meant to hide not just the images and the text, but to do so in a way that leaves behind all of the other interface interactions, the rollovers, the pop-ups, etc. You can fully use Facebook with SafeBook installed. You can like someone's status, you can write a new post, you can have a conversation, you can watch videos. You can't hear them or see them, of course, but you get the idea. And so, obviously, as with some of the things that I make, this reductive interface isn't necessarily a great solution to the problem. I don't tend to try to generate solutions, but it does draw attention to not only the challenge of making Facebook safe, but also to how homogenizing its aesthetics are, to just how familiar this interface becomes. Facebook is a complex product. It's full of all kinds of places and spaces and features and functions, and I can easily navigate the Facebook interface with SafeBook installed. I know where I am. I've interacted with others while using it. So in 2019, after a decade of projects focused on the platforms these companies had engineered, I realized I wanted to take a step back a bit and think more about who engineers software in order to better understand how it comes to be the way it is in the first place. Why are these platforms littered with this growth aesthetic that I'm talking about? This is my question. And this led me to focus on Mark Zuckerberg. I guess I call him just by his first name now. You'll see why in a second. As a quintessential CEO in Silicon Valley, using every one of his publicly available video recorded appearances from the first moment he appeared in public life in 2004 up through the end of 2018, just into 2019. So 15 years, the first 15 years of Facebook. And I decided to extract every time he spoke one of three things. Every time he spoke about more, every time he spoke about growth, and every time he uttered a metric like 1 million or 2 billion. And I used this to create a video supercut that chronicles Silicon Valley's obsessions with growth during the first 15 years of the social media era. And Soren alluded to this, but when I started working on this project, when I had the idea, I thought, you know what, nobody's going to want to watch a long video of Mark Zuckerberg talking about more. By long, I meant 5 or 10 minutes, but I wanted to see it. So I started working on it. I started gathering the materials, I started extracting these bits, and I got to 5 minutes, and I got to 10 minutes, and I got to 15, and I got to 20, and I wasn't anywhere near done. And I kept going, and by the end of this process, it was almost 50 minutes long of nothing but those words. And I think the scale of the outcome is fitting to the subject of the project. I'm going to show you a short version of it that I only show in talks. The full work, as well as what I will show you today, is in temporal order. So it starts when he's 19 in his first appearance. It ends after he's been pulled in front of Congress and the European Parliament and everything else, coming at the end of 2018 when Cambridge Analytica came out. You see all kinds of changes throughout the project. It starts with really low quality video from 2004. It ends with high quality HD video at the end. You see different formats emerge, and you see changes in Mark too, and how he speaks and how he presents himself and how he is presented and how people react to him over time. So let's see I'm going to turn down some of these lights. I thought I would. Yeah, I guess that'll work. All right.
Many more, 400, 500, 100,000 for 100 or 200.
To grow it, and therefore it would grow thousands.
I mean,
There doesn't necessarily have to be more. Almost a million. More focused on growing really quickly. More than 40%. More than a third of a few thousand more schools. I think I have like 15,000 pending friend requests. More. A few thousand, 100 or 200. The 100 or 200, 6 million, 6 million, 100 million, 100 billion of more. Hundreds of thousands. It's more, it's much. Sharing more information, taper the growth, more of it, more engaging, and that users trust more, are going to be the ones that spread through the system more. They're going to get a lot more, become more open, share more, make themselves more open and share more. More than 70 million, maybe a few thousand speak more. Just grew so quickly and there's more of it. A lot more. Fastest growing, hundreds of millions is more, a lot more, more, 50%, more than 500 million, more than 50%. And now it's growing. Was more, make them more, much more engaging, and 750 million for almost half a billion, multiple billions, and be more, a lot more and more, tens of millions of more that are more than a million, right? More than a million, 10,000, tens of thousands for one more, much more, a lot more, an order of magnitude more. It's more than 200 million billion. The growth, more access to more. I'm so much more, half a billion more, probably a lot more, would grow more and more, sharing more and more, billions, a trillion or more. Thousands of more than a trillion. There's a lot more. More. A billion. 500 million. Half a billion. Or more efficient. More. The first billion, way more. 6 billion. 11 million. 5 billion. 11 million. Kept on growing to the next billion. More. A billion isn't like a magical number. 5 billion. Billions, 699 million. More than 40% of more competition. It's more. It's around 20%. And we're growing, more engaging, more sharing, more. What's more likely is that almost a billion grow and more than 100,000 ungrow. Growing really quickly, more human, growing more stuff of more than one to get more. There are thousands at 100%. People want more valuable. We've been pushing just to get more 1,000 or 100 million, 9,000, 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or 8,000, 1,000, right? It's 9,000 or 10 million or 100 million or more. It's actually growing really slowly. It's not growing at a fast rate. 5 billion, 1.5 billion, 5 billion. It's about 2,600, right? 1,500 is the data. Focus on the first billion. The first billion, way more, continue growing. And more data, more, but also more money, more profitable, and then a lot more, multiple times more things. More profit gets more, do more things, more, get more, 100 or more, a billion or more.
Gross more has grown. To grow, it's growing more data, I think, do more. To grow more, accelerate the growth of tens of billions, a lot of more tools, more tools. It grows even more profitable and grows even more.
250 million, more to a billion, community of a billion. A billion's kind of an arbitrary number. It's a nice round number, but it's a little arbitrary. Billion. About a billion, 4 billion, 1,000 or 10,000 times more. More than half of more, then it's hundreds of millions of more than 15 million. More. Not less. More, even more things, and more than 50 more, but more than thousands, hundreds of millions of more. When they just said more than 100 more, and you grow more than 100, grow more than everyone else, more than half of more, growing growth team, growing more, about a billion, 5 billion to billions of more, a lot more. More will be more. It's gonna be a lot more. 85,000, about 200 to 225, getting more and more. More followers got more engagement, about 1,100,000. It's grown into more than a billion, gonna get more engagements. Millions of more than 50 times as much. More, because when thousands of more than a million, growing, more than 10, more and more, 2 billion more open, even more. More open, more. That the more are more, 30 different, more than 100 million, almost 2 billion to 100 million of them, more than 50%. More, a lot more, 1 billion, more, thousands of more, so you can, a lot more than a million, thousands of.
We may find more, but we can do more. We will more than double, we'll add more than 250, share more services to help more, thousands of, some of the more, 100 times or 1,000 times bigger than billions and billions with tens of millions, as many as 2 million, growing and improving quickly, and we'll keep you updated with more soon.
About millions of more to do. And you can find more than 2 billion giving more. So we've definitely grown. About 100 billion times deserves more than growing in importance. More experiences that we'll have about 20,000. There are tens of thousands of more, tens of thousands of a few more things.
More than 20 million, more than 80 million, grown, more. And we've been more, tens of thousands of more. We're more 20,000 more focused on more, thousands of more, and more, a lot more, still more steps, give you more, a lot more like feeling more.
1.5 billion more deeply, more 2.5 billion, feel more by 50 million, more than 2 billion of more than 2 billion, more 80 million, 4.5 million, many more. It's going to go more, just even more, 2.5 billion.
So you got to understand, right? There's more than 10 times that much. And while certain things change throughout, of course, there's one thing that doesn't, and it's his answer to every question. It's always the same answer. It's more, it's numbers, it's growth. Doesn't matter whether things are going well or things are going bad. It's always the same. And as Soren mentioned, you can go see the whole film. It'll be at the Louisiana Museum in an exhibition opening next week called The Irreplaceable Human. But it's also online, so you don't even have to get on the train. You can just watch the whole thing. I recommend that you do it with friends, right? I mean, you can have Mark barking at you in the corner of your screen, but I think it's a little more interesting in a group. Maybe it tempers some of the depression that sometimes this movie can generate for people. Some people think of it as horror, some people think of it as satire, so maybe it just depends on what your reaction was. When the pandemic arrived in 2020, I, like many others, found myself glued to my phone more than ever, engaging in an activity that became commonly referred to as doom scrolling. But in those early days of the pandemic, doom scrolling wasn't just a natural reaction to the news of the day. It was the result of a perfect yet evil marriage between so many of us stuck online, social media interfaces designed to game and hold our attention, and the realities of an existential global crisis. And this feeling, this way of being, led me to create this work that I call the Endless Doom Scroller. It's a website, you can go to endlessdoomscroller.com, that presents a never-ending stream of doom, but without all of the specifics. Its interface mimics the feed style of social media. Its headlines are abstracted versions of real ones. But you can scroll for as long or as fast as you like, but you'll never, ever, ever get to the end. They just keep coming. And so it's a reductive interface that distills social media sites down to their barest, most generalized messages and interface conventions. It shows us what's behind our scroll-induced anxiety, interfaces and corporations that always want more. More doom, in this case, led to more time on site, led to more personal data, which generates more profit. And so after a decade of investigations focused on Silicon Valley's obsessions with more and accumulation and growth, much of it on the work and words of Mark Zuckerberg himself, I found myself in 2021 asking a new question. Does Mark ever talk about less? So I set about searching the videos as I had before, the same archive for the previous film, finding and extracting every time that he spoke about less. And now my intuition, and perhaps yours, in this moment, was that I wouldn't find 47 minutes of less, right? But even I was still surprised to discover just how little this concept occurs in his rhetoric, because when I added up every time he spoke about less from age 19 to age 34 on camera, I found it took less than 60 seconds when all strung together. And while that tiny bit of less certainly reinforces the previous film, it also made me wonder, what might the world look like if Mark had thought about less as much as he'd thought about more? How would it be different? And so I used this raw material not to make the supercut that I assembled, but to create a new film called Deficit of Less, where I set out to reanimate Mark into an alternate reality, expanding his less to be exactly as long as his more. So I took those few bits and I stretched them out, I slowed them down. So it's nearly 50 times its original length. I'll play you a kind of little 1 minute kind of version of that, but this is also online. You can watch the whole thing. So how might the world be different if Mark had been this inert? Where would we be as a society and a planet if he hadn't been so focused on growth and engagement to make the world more open and connected? What if Facebook had been engineered to give its users time rather than taking it? Or more specifically, what if a social network wasn't always growing, limited your ability to use it, and tried to slow you down rather than speed you up? What if a social network wanted less instead of more? This was the question I asked, and so in 2021 I built one and called it Minus. Minus is a finite social network where you get 100 posts for life, where every time you add to the feed, it subtracts from your lifetime total. And then when you get to 0 posts left, that's it. You just can't post anymore. The feed on Minus is reverse chronological, not algorithmic. Post timestamps are vague, not age metrics. Nothing is monetized. There's no likes or follows or noisy notifications. And the site's only visible metric counts down, showing how many posts each user has remaining. And so just like life, Minus has limits. It doesn't pretend, like Big Social does, that everything, including our time and attention, is infinite. And last spring, I spent some time at the Berkman Klein Center engaging in a deep qualitative read of Minus's history, going back to the beginning to try to see what kind of culture emerges on this finite social platform, and how is it different from what emerges on infinite platforms focused on endless growth. So I'll give a few examples to give you a sense. First of all, a lot of people come on, they become pretty quickly reflective on the topic of the 100. They often come on saying, oh, this is like 100s, that's, I need more, right? That's the first reaction a lot of people have. But pretty quickly, some find that it might feel like more than they expected. Minus users are often emotionally self-reflective, sometimes thinking about other platforms as part of their writing. Minus posts can be intense or revealing. This isn't unique to Minus, but it certainly happens with greater frequency than I might have expected. Minus posts could be playful. So in this case, Joanna Rogers came on and without any preamble or explanation just started posting these Mad Lib constructions and seeing what would happen and how people would fill them in. This ended up getting written up by Joanna and Rob Wittig, who are electronic literature colleagues of Soren's in Electronic Book Review. Minus is filled with poetry. There's original poetry that people write on Minus. There's a lot of quoted poetry. People respond to poetry with poetry. It's one of the most common things that's there. Sometimes the post can be vaguely analytical of the system from a media studies kind of perspective, and then Soren, I hope you don't mind, can be thinking deeply about, it gets people thinking deeply about what's happening here. I also noticed today the winter gray outside. I have a different feeling of that, having been here for 2 months now. And I know it's not even winter, but it's multilingual. I've counted more than 15 languages so far. I haven't gotten through that much of it, to be honest. So I don't know how many, and exactly how many, of course, doesn't matter. But the point is that there's a lot of people posting different languages on the feed, and it's a unified feed. The feed doesn't adjust its language to you. You can translate it if you want. I don't have anything built in, and it's generated a culture where if someone posts in Portuguese, often the people who don't speak Portuguese will go and translate it And then they'll respond by translating their own responses into Portuguese. So I want to share just a few arguments I'm working on based on some of this reading of Minus's history. The first is that user activity on a social platform reflects the values embedded in that platform structure and presented by its interface. For example, infinite social media that center growth, endless growth, gets users focused on growth themselves or on the idea of growing themselves. Their decisions about what to say and how to say it become driven by a received and internalized desire for more likes, more follows, etc. Whereas finite social media that centers constraint gets users focused on time, on life, on play. On Minus, there's more poetry than politics. Its users philosophize instead of polarize. There's almost never trolling or hate speech, or most of the other toxic behaviors that you see on infinite platforms. Novel constraints lead to novel conversation. While infinite platforms get users thinking in numbers, likes, follows, retweets, etc., Minus gets them thinking and talking about numbers, joking about them, playing with them, critiquing them, worrying about whether what they're going to post is worth posting because they only have so many opportunities left. The numbers are no longer a target, they're a subject, a way of thinking about what online social is and what the role of numbers have been and could be. The more that a platform tries to engage all senses, the less it leaves to the imagination. Minus is text and emoji only by design, and so rather than post other media, users quote lyrics. They describe photos, they reference memes, they make images out of ASCII or emoji. Once again, the constraints become generative. And many of the big social infinite platforms started out with some version of this. Facebook started out as just text. Twitter started out as just text. Instagram started out as just images. But over time, they add and they add and they add and they copy each other and they grow until they're super noisy and nothing is left to the imagination. And so part of what I'm coming to here is that alternative platforms get people rethinking what's happening on the big platforms. Coming to Minus makes people think about the platform they came from, often with a fresh critical perspective. Perhaps more importantly, alternative platforms get people imagining new alternative platforms. A primary topic on Minus is not only how it's different, but people start having their own ideas about what else one might do. That's why we need more strange, radical, alternative platform experiments. It's because strange platform experiments help us find where the lines are between induced engagement and desired online interaction. They can present an opportunity to experiment with alternatives to big social's growth aesthetics. And so before I conclude, we can do some questions if there are some. I want to do something I don't normally do in a talk like this, which is I want to preview a new project I'm working on that isn't done yet. And the motivation for me doing this will become evident in a second. And the subject of this project, I've done some focus on this before, but the subject that's new one is TikTok, in particular its For You page. How many use TikTok or have used TikTok in here? Most hands. So it's the For You page, the endlessly scrolling, algorithmically ordered, AI-driven feed that both users and the media alike often focus on. That AI feed is thinking about how it really gets us, right? Like it knows us, it makes users feel seen. This is how it gets talked about. How TikTok reads your mind, the New York Times says. But there's only one problem from my perspective with all of this obsession over TikTok's all-knowing AI. I think it's incomplete or perhaps completely wrong about what's going on TikTok. And I don't mean that the AI isn't choosing videos for you and using some signals, just like all algorithmic feeds do. But I do challenge the idea that it's the all-knowing AI that makes TikTok the addictive, all-consuming experience that so many users report, including me. In my view, what's being ignored is the role of the TikTok interface. In particular, the growth aesthetics embedded within the interface, from its mega metrics to its endless vertical scroll, to the repetitions that scrolling enables in video and sound, to the alluring swipe gesture that keeps you moving forward. And after getting stuck in that scroll for more hours than I would be willing to admit, what most catches my attention when I try to observe myself using TikTok isn't how compelling I find the videos there, but instead how easily I lose track of time. And when I step back and watch myself use TikTok, I realize that many, if not most, of the videos that are appearing on my feed aren't really of that much interest to me. But what I've learned to do, what I've been conditioned to do by the design of the interface, is to identify those videos that I'm not interested in and to move past them within seconds or possibly microseconds. Flip, 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 ah, right? Flip, flip. Is this familiar to anyone? And, you know, I can lay in bed for hours doing this. I can literally fall asleep and the phone falls out of my hand, watching videos I'm not that interested in. That interests me and disturbs me, right? I mean, sometimes I can wake up and I don't even remember. Like I end up I liked something. I don't even recognize the video that I liked. I don't know why it's in my likes. And I will tell Kate, oh, I must have accidentally pressed like, because I'm trying to mask that I didn't do this for so long. It's almost as if when I'm using the TikTok interface, I enter a sort of trance state, a space where time gets fuzzy, that's punctuated by these quick successive swipes of my thumb, occasionally watching a video all the way through, most of the time not. In other words, I almost become machinic in my scanning of the feed. It's almost like I get stuck and I lose my ability to discern. I forget how long it's been. I lose track of what's coming up. And it reminds me of what Francois Bonnet calls a hyper-present, a period where the repetitive nature of contemporary culture imposes a sort of amnesia, a forgetting of the past, where we also stop projecting ourselves and our possibilities of self into a future. Instead, we end up focused on constantly synchronizing with everyone else all of the time. In the hyper-present, time feels infinite instead of finite. And of course, nothing could be more useful to the big social media companies than users who are so stuck in the scroll they don't even realize it's happening. Because that turns users into endless data producers, at least until they die for real. But of course, there's always new ones behind them. So I'm working on this new piece that is related to this that I'm calling. And this is what I'll be running a workshop on next Tuesday at 10 a.m. that you're all invited to. I hope some of you might be willing to attend. Where my aim is to start to cultivate a deliberately slow practice of doing something that nobody has ever done before, I would guess, which is pull up your feed and watch in its entirety every video there. For a period of time, right? For 40 minutes or something like that. Just don't ever swipe before it's done. Watch each video. Watch each ad. See what they're about. And not just the ones that catch our attention, but also the ones that we don't, is the idea. And then in response, we'll write short text descriptions of them. So each of us individually of each video on our feed, that I'll then gather, if you agree, and use in a new app that presents them for anyone to browse via an interface that mimics TikTok's vertical feed. But instead of video and audio and metrics and all the rest, you'll just get the text. And so, the idea is it's a way of breaking out of the flow that TikTok constructs for us. It's not just an othering of space, but an othering of time, a place for and practice of, perhaps, an aesthetics of participatory degrowth. And if you're interested to see how TikTok feels different, if you're willing to give an hour or so of your time to this strange endeavor, or if you want to contribute and be a part of the artwork with credit, of course, by writing text descriptions or poetic reflections, or we'll try some different prompts, then that's at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. Thank you for your time. It's such a pleasure to be here. That's it.